And thanks for being here, and thanks very much to AGC for hosting this important job fair. We're going to start today with a presentation on our demographics and workforce from Matt Berwicks from the Department of Labor. My hope is that you will have a better understanding of why I'm so concerned and why we need to address these challenges. So before I offer my thoughts, I think I'll turn it over to Matt.
Thank you, Governor. I appreciate the opportunity to be here today. As the Governor said, I was invited here to talk a little bit about the Vermont economy, specifically the data involving our Vermont labor force. So I'm a state employee with the Vermont Department of Labor, but I'm basically 100% federally funded by the U.S. Department of Labor, specifically the Bureau of Labor Statistics and the Employment and Training Administration.
Participants are waiting in the lobby. To admit all participants in the lobby, press star.
So we produce, compile, release economic data consistent with federal methodology. So Vermont's data is comparable with other states and other areas across the country. So today what we're going to be looking at is a little bit of economic data, which is everyone's favorite topic, I'm sure. We're going to move on. I will try not to reveal any opinions because what I'm actually sharing is just the data as presented to me. So there's never a good time for a global health pandemic. We can all agree on that. But data-wise, 2020, specifically March 2020, was a terrible time because in April 2020, the U.S. Census Bureau was kicking off its 10-year census. And so what that has done to the data systems is it's put a little bit of a wrinkle in the front end of this data, and it's delayed not only the collection, the start, the compilation, and the finalization of that data. So that has been a challenge. So what we have today is to discuss is the best data available to us. And so for the 10-year period between 2010 and 2020, we thought Vermont's population was stable at 626,000. Plus or minus 1,000 every year, no big changes. Well, when the 2020 census data was compiled, we had an additional 17,000 Vermonters we didn't anticipate. So with a population estimate in 2020 of 643,000. And as we're looking at the partial results of this data and looking at what happened, we can see that actually 3 counties experienced population declines over this period of time, which was a surprise because we anticipated 6. We also anticipated the bottom 3 counties of Windham, Windsor, and Bennington to also be negative, but actually it was just Essex, Caledonia, and Rutland. And if we take this population data and start working through to our next graphic here and talking about the actual labor force of the Vermont economy, we can see that each county has hit peak labor force in the past, meaning at some point they were at a higher labor force than they're currently at. Most counties peaked in 2010, 2011, 2012, but some counties like Chittenden and Franklin actually peaked 3 years ago or 3 years ago. Nonetheless, from peak, all counties are down in their labor force. And so we have a situation where 8 counties are showing declines in their labor force of 10% or more, and then 6 counties showing declines of labor force of 15% or more. And it's those 6 counties I mentioned earlier, 3 in red experiencing population declines in addition to a labor force decline, but the other 3 being ones that had a population increase, but we actually anticipated a population decrease. So even though they have increasing population, they have decreasing labor force. And that is actually something that you can see across the state of Vermont, where if you look at our population has been slowly growing. And as I said, in 2020, it grew faster than we anticipated, still not as high as the US rates, but it's been our labor force that's been pulling back. And this has been a conversation that we've been having at the Department of Labor for this administration for many years now. When we look at this information and start asking questions about what's happening and the demographics associated with the state of Vermont and how it's impacting the labor force, we can look at 2020 and just rough numbers. If we talk about the prime age for a working Vermonter of 35 to 54, in 2000 it was about a third of our labor force, or a third of our population, was in that 35 to 54 range in 2000. Conversely, by 2020, it was about a quarter. And so we've gone down significantly our working age population, the prime working age, and the over 55 category, what used to be under a quarter of our population in 2000 is now over a third in 2020. And this is not to say that mature workers or individuals over 55 are not an important part of our Vermont economy, because they're a critical part of our Vermont economy. And we need to talk about the economic support systems associated with supporting mature workers. And I think we're hearing a new trend emerging right now in the labor force called unretirements. We had a lot of retirements during this economic downturn, and it's possible that we're going to start seeing unretirements and maybe some more of those encore careers, individuals coming into the labor force to fill gainful employment positions that they're interested and passionate about, but ultimately will help the Vermont economy. So as we're moving forward this, it's like really, the labor force has kind of a pathway in and a pathway out. So we've talked a little bit about mature workers. It's no coincidence that the leading edge of the baby boomers turned 75 in 2021. We've been experiencing downward pressure in our labor force for about the last 10 years. Since 2011, as we talked about, with many counties reaching peak labor force participation then. So we've seen the declines, but on the flip side, and especially in the backdrop of where we are today, this job fair where we have hundreds of Vermont students out there, we can talk about the labor force participation rate among youth. And we actually see that, oops, can you back it up too, please? Yeah, that one, thank you. The labor force participation rate among youth in the 2000s used to be about 60%, meaning 6 out of every 10 Vermont youth at age 16 to 19 was in the labor force, and now it's dropped to under 40%. And so going from above 50% to now below 50%, we have that shrinking incidence rate of people, youth in Vermont participating in the labor force. But beyond that, if we go to the next slide, the pie itself has shrunk, and we've had a lot of conversations about this as well across the state, and seeing that there's just fewer Vermont youth, right? We've had a low birth rate for several decades. As a result, we've seen declining enrollments in our public education systems. And on the next slide, we're actually looking at decreases across the state for 11 of the 14 counties in double digits for their student populations. So in addition to having fewer students, the incidence of those students actually participating in the labor force are less as well. And so this is obviously just a quick dive into the data. There's a lot of economic stories and narrative that go with each one of these slides, and hopefully this is just a kind of an introduction to the overall concept of the downward pressure we've experienced in the state of Vermont in our labor force, and ultimately the tightness we're experiencing in our labor market. And with the last slide, this kind of emphasizes it. This is a graph indicating job postings in the state of Vermont as estimated by my partners at the Bureau of Labor Statistics. And you can see that we are at record high levels of job postings, meaning job availability. And I think a lot of employers out there at the Champlain Valley Expo would agree that they are trying to hire, they're trying to recruit more than they ever have. This comes from the JOLTS data at the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and the last statistic, a number I'll leave you with, is while employers are doing their best to post jobs and recruit jobs, when you look at the hiring data, they're showing that there is about historical trends of hiring, right? It's very difficult to onboard. It's time consuming to post, to interview, to recruit, to hire. And then quits, we're seeing high levels of quits. And this is part of that discussion that's going across the nation with the big quit or the big retirement, this exodus, this pullback in the labor force across the country. But if you compare hires to quits, it's about a 3-to-2 ratio looking at the last few months, meaning for every 3 hires an employer in Vermont is making, they receive 2 quits. And you can see why this is the difficulty and the traction that we're trying to gain as we go through this period of economic certainty, period of economic transition. So again, I want to thank you for the opportunity to be here today. Thank you, Governor.
Thank you very much, Matt. And while this is very interesting data, it's also very sober as well. It's why since my first year in office, I've talked about our desperate need to reverse our demographic trends. If we don't right this ship, we'll continue to see our workforce shrink. That's fewer nurses, child care providers, contractors to build homes, roads, and install utilities, truck drivers to bring in materials, grocery workers to feed us, and pharmacists to help us with our health. These impacts affect every single one of our labor sectors. It also means fewer students in schools and state colleges, fewer customers for businesses, and fewer taxpayers, placing the burden on fewer and fewer of us. That's why anything we do, and with every policy we consider, we need to be asking ourselves, will this help or hurt our workforce crisis? If the answer is it won't help, then we should instead put it on the back burner and prioritize the things that will. We know there are a lot of good jobs available today, so I hope you take a look around the fair and talk to employers as well. You'll hear the same story over and over again. Good paying jobs are out there, but they're struggling to fill them. As I've said, this is true in all sectors, but especially in the trades, which is why we're here today. Whether it's plumbers, electricians, line workers, fiber splicers, carpenters, or mechanics, Vermont is in desperate need of more of them. This will become even more clear as we begin spending billions in federal funds and start projects funded through the federal bipartisan infrastructure bill. That's why going into this session, nearly every initiative my administration proposed had workforce in mind. Whether it's housing, water, sewer, and stormwater, weatherization, broadband, and more, each proposal aims to grow the economy and make Vermont more affordable in order to help make our state a more attractive place to live, work, and raise a family. We have a plan and a vision to help transform Vermont using this once-in-a-generation opportunity. That's why I've been so concerned about the legislature's budget. We simply can't afford to screw this up. We've got to get this right because we're not going to get a second chance. So over the next couple of weeks of the session, Vermonters can count on me and my team to continue pushing to make the most of this moment and invest in the priorities that will set us up for the long term and not use one-time money to band-aid government programs. Secretary Curley and Commissioner Harrington will talk more about our efforts to support employers and help connect Vermonters with jobs that are available. So I'll now turn it over to Commissioner Harrington.
Thank you, Governor, and thank you and good afternoon. It's great to be here today, especially in person, I might add. Just before I get into my remarks, we were walking around earlier and hearing from employers that the success for them for today, beyond finding new talent and getting resumes, is just the fact that they've been able to meet face-to-face with applicants and job seekers and students and tell them about their business, shake their hand, have them participate in the process. So there is a win here today just by having people meet in person and face-to-face. Today's event kicks off hiring season in Vermont with seasonal employers coming back online. There's no better time than right now for job seekers to find meaningful work at a great wage. That said, today's job fair is not just about seasonal work. Yes, there are a number of trades represented here through the construction industry and others, but you also will find employers from the healthcare sector, government, law enforcement, food service, manufacturing, goods and services, and many others. I think we can all agree that the past 2 years have really taken its toll on Vermont's workforce, and that was shown by Matt's slides earlier. Many people used the pandemic to find a different career path or to leave the labor force altogether. And it left employers across our state racing to fill thousands of vacant jobs. Unfortunately, this problem is not unique to Vermont, and there is no silver bullet. And here in Vermont, the workforce gap cannot be filled with Vermont's current population alone. There simply aren't enough working-age Vermonters to fill all the vacancies that our employers have. That is why we must prioritize transformational investments in key areas such as schools and communities, like the Governor said. We need to expand broadband and build more quality housing. We need to invest in workforce and economic development. And we must make Vermont the affordable option for both relocating families and new businesses. Additionally, we must recognize that we are not just competing against ourselves, we're competing against every other state for the same talent. Because of this, we must be faster, we must be more agile, and willing to take risks in order to build the Vermont of tomorrow. And we must invest in key areas that foster growth and progress, Otherwise, we will forever be faced with significant shortfalls in our talent pool, which is why the governor has made workforce and workforce expansion a top priority even before this pandemic happened. At the Vermont Department of Labor, our workforce development team is actively engaged with schools and educators, employers, community partners, and job seekers from across the state to find ways to grow Vermont's labor force and link employers with the talent they so desperately need. In fact, you may see some of the department's team outside here today throughout the expo wearing yellow vests and assisting job seekers creating accounts in VermontJobLink.com and connecting with employers in real time. I would like to take a moment to recognize and appreciate also the large number of schools and students who are participating in today's event. It is absolutely imperative that we work with our youth to make them aware of all the terrific opportunities, especially those that they have before them right here in this state, whether it be a certificate program such as a licensed nursing assistant, a credential like a master electrician or a plumber, or a 2 or 4 year degree. There is no single path to gainful employment, and today's youth have more options available to them than ever before. As a designated state workforce agency, the Vermont Department of Labor is meeting Vermonters where they're at, not in offices, but around the community, in libraries and at events, to help them find the training and apprenticeship programs that meet their needs and to connect them with the jobs that are meaningful to them. Today, here at this event, there are hundreds of good opportunities for someone looking to begin a career, and this is just a small representation of the jobs across our state. And as I mentioned earlier, this is just the start of the hiring season here in Vermont. On May 3rd, there's a hiring event in Rutland. On May 11th in Springfield, May 19th in Middlebury, May 24th in Bennington, and June 1st in Barre. If you or someone you know is looking for help in finding a job or is hiring workers, please reach out to us here at the department at labor.vermont.gov/jobs or at VermontJobLink.com. Thank you for deciding to make today's event a priority. I'd also like to take a minute to thank the Associated General Contractors of Vermont, or AGC, for coming up with this idea and for organizing this event. I believe there's over 150 employers here today, more than 700 students here today, and we expect a few hundred more from the general public here as well. That is truly amazing in our brave little state. So thank you all for being here today. I'll now turn it over to Secretary Curley from the Agency of Commerce and Community Development. Secretary.
Thank you, Commissioner. Hello and good afternoon, everyone. As the Commissioner said, it is so great to be here today to see so many Vermont employers coming together to collectively show Vermonters what opportunities exist, for people who are looking to start or grow their career right here in our state. It is a great event, and we hope that there are some employee-employer matches that are made right here today. As the hard work continues to change our demographic trajectory in the state, which Matt just laid out so clearly, we know we need to continue investment in workforce recruitment, training, and incentives. And as Commissioner Harrington mentioned, the Department of Labor is deployed across the state taking on workforce challenges. But we also realize it's not just those things that will reverse the current demographic trends. Workers need housing, and they need attractive, safe, and supportive communities to call home. And therein lies both the challenge and the opportunity. There is no one program or idea that is going to solve all of this for our state. We need a diverse array of solutions that can work together to create a brighter future for our state. So in addition to the workforce development programs at the Department of Labor, we also have an array of housing and economic development programs at the Agency of Commerce and Community Development that are another part of our strategy. We want to create opportunities in our downtowns, our village centers for economic growth that will attract new workers and businesses that want to expand or move to our state. Whether that means funding to clean up toxic land and old buildings so they can be redeveloped, or using federal funds to help businesses expand and make capital investments. These investments support the survival of small business, lead to more childcare options, and jumpstart stagnant tax bases in our cities and towns. When it comes to housing, we're looking to create more affordable housing options, but also more modestly priced housing for mixed income Vermonters or middle income Vermonters, as well as helping landlords fix up our existing housing stock that has fallen into disrepair. We also have successful relocation incentive programs for people who come to Vermont to take a Vermont job, or maybe they work remotely for an out-of-state employer. We hope to refund these programs and build a recruitment and relocation network that will connect potential new residents with local Vermonters who can help them work through their housing options, recommend schools or daycare for their kids, and find jobs at growing companies. We should be setting up this network now so that we are ready to act as soon as new housing comes online, broadband rolls out, and businesses expand in the years ahead. Many of these programs I just mentioned are well known as they've been discussed and debated in the legislature for months now, but it's important to realize just how interconnected this all is. None of our efforts should happen in a vacuum. It all needs to work together in real time if we're going to reverse our current trends. COVID-19 and our response to the crisis has made Vermont a place of interest for people looking to move and a place of interest for businesses who are looking to expand. We consistently rank as one of the healthiest and the best states to raise a family and one of the safest states in the country. We want to keep that positive momentum going and offer not just jobs, but strong local economies that will help residents, both new and old, thrive here. Thanks again to the organizers of this event today. We hope it yields positive results for the employers and the job seekers and plays a part in the state's continued recovery coming out of the pandemic. With that, I'll turn it back over to the governor.
Thank you very much, Secretary Curley. And now we'll open it up to questions.
Starting with folks in the room.
What is the estimate for exactly how many jobs are open in Vermont right now across all?
Hard to say. I'm going to ask Commissioner Harrington to answer. We have the job links page, Vermont Link page, but I don't think that encapsulates all of the jobs that are available. But I think that's around 17 or 18,000, if I have that right. But
Yeah, so
come on up.
yeah. So on VermontJobLink.com, our team has done actually a really great job over the past 2 years of trying to compile the jobs that are available in Vermont. I think on the job board itself, it's somewhere around 15,000, give or take a few thousand, because they come on and come off so quickly. But Matt also whispered in my ear, so I want to give him credit, that based on the numbers we get from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, it's roughly about 26,000 available jobs across the state.
Coupled with that, though, I hear from many who say, why don't we just take all the folks that are on unemployment and force them into the jobs we have available? Well, last week, I believe we're down to 2,750, is that right?
Right around 3,000.
Around 3,000 who are on unemployment right now. So that doesn't fill the need. Doesn't even come anywhere near what we need. So that's why we keep talking about the demographics, why we need to have more people come into the state, and why all these investments are so important, like housing and so forth. Yes.
Sorry, given that the Senate passed their tax package this morning, would you support a child tax credit as it's coming out of the legislature right now? It's $22 million, $48 million, given that it's very different from the tax package that you released.
Well, first of all, I want to talk about the positives. I am thrilled that after 6 years being in office, that the legislature has proposed any tax relief. This is the first time that I can recall that they've even considered that. It's usually the other way around. They're trying to raise taxes. So I'm thrilled with that. Very encouraging sign. We have a difference of opinion on this one. And while the child care tax credit is important, as it passed the House, and I haven't seen what they've done in the Senate. This is news to me, that they passed it out of committee, but it hasn't passed the Senate floor yet either, correct? Or it passed the Senate floor this morning? Okay. So from my perspective, again, our tax package was much broader. it helped more people. As we looked at the proposals that came out of the House, which I don't imagine has changed a lot in terms of how many people it would help, it was about 10% of Vermonters that would help, and that was at that point it was a tax credit for those making $200,000 or less, and for kids 6 and under. Now our tax package helped seniors. It helped military pensions, those who had a career in the military. It helped, again, Social Security. It was just much, much broader. It helped students with their loans in terms of being able to take advantage of that on their taxes, the student loans, as well as nurses and child care providers. So ours is much broader and helped 25% of the population. So we still have differences. I would say that I wouldn't support it in its entirety, but I have to look at the whole package.
What would be your criteria for vetoing this?
That it doesn't help enough people, that it doesn't satisfy the needs that we have in terms of trying to attract more people into the state, which we desperately need.
You would consider vetoing the tax?
Sure. Yeah.
Governor, I want to ask about the timeline of all this, and maybe Commissioner Harrington can weigh in too, but talking about, solving our demographic itch, it's not going to happen overnight. It certainly hasn't happened. The problem didn't happen overnight. Given some of these investments in housing, broadband, could take 5, 10 years, maybe longer. I mean, if these investments, as you propose, are made today, what do you see as a timeline going forward into really getting our demographics back on track? I know it's a hard one to make, but
Again, I'll let Secretary Curley and Commissioner Harrington answer some of that as well. But keep in mind, we were making some progress over the first 2 or 3 years before the pandemic hit. We have seen a population increase again. It's been stagnant for a number of years. We saw in the last census that has actually increased just a little bit. We have a long ways to go, and we have to start somewhere. Some of the proposals that we put forth are more immediate than others. I'd say the VHIP program, for instance, would be more immediate. That would help with some of our housing needs instantaneously. That's why we were so adamant about the $70 million we put in budget adjustment for housing that we asked the legislature to take up, because it would help. We could put that money to work right now. We all agree that housing is a crisis in Vermont. So we need that money to invest that right at the start of the session, which would have been back in January. The legislature decided to strip that out. They said that they would take care of it quickly and pass it in a separate bill, and that has not passed as of yet today. So that strategy didn't work, but we'll continue to work with them to make sure that we have a housing package that works for everyone. Commissioner Harrington, Secretary Curley, want to add anything?
I don't have a crystal ball either. I don't have a lot to add, but the governor made all the right points. And to your point too, it didn't happen overnight. It's going to take some time, but we do feel momentum happening right now with people, a desire to come to Vermont as well. So we want to really keep that momentum going, and housing is going to be critical. And in the meantime, what we're seeing is a lot of people who are willing to be creative to try to figure out, we even have employers that are talking about building employee housing around the state. So we have a lot of folks that are trying to figure this out, and maybe more people are going to share space, but we have to work on both of them at the same time. I think there are some people that are saying, are you getting ahead of things if you don't have a place to put people? We can figure that out, right? We have to be doing both. We need people right now because employers are not even able to sustain their current level of operations, much less think about growing without people coming in. So I wish I had an answer.
I think I'll just reiterate a point I made in my remarks, which is we're competing against every other state. When I talk to my counterparts in other departments of labor across the country, every state is looking for workers. They all have employers who are hiring, and they're all trying to fill those jobs. And so when we talk about how do we grow Vermont's population and working age population from the outside in, we've got to talk about the way we're going to attract those families, those professionals, those individuals to come to our state and decide to work here. And so it will not come just because we have a job available for them, because there are jobs available all across the country. So it will need to be because Vermont is more affordable, our schools are top in the country, we have plenty of housing available, we have thriving neighborhoods and safe streets. You know, again, we have to think about those things that make us unique, and we have to invest in those things to make us an attractable place for people to want to relocate to.
Governor, speaking of safe streets, this past weekend we're talking 6 or 7 gun crimes in the area, not just here but statewide. Do you have any comment on that, and is it a trend that you see continue?
Yeah, hopefully it's not a trend. Obviously, we're very concerned about this. But when we go back to, again, some of our workforce challenges that we have, law enforcement isn't immune. We're seeing some situations throughout the state where we're having reduction in the number of law enforcement in communities, and that's something that we also have to work on to make sure that we backfill those positions, because we're feeling that pressure as well as a state with our Vermont State Police. So everything has to work together. Those in law enforcement need the same things. They need a decent, affordable house to live in. So I keep going back to the bottleneck from my perspective is housing. Because when we talk with some of our youth who are graduating from high school or tech schools or colleges and universities, their first question is there a job available for me? Is there a career that is available to me? And the answer today is yes. Yes, there is. Secondly, they ask, is there decent, affordable housing for us? Where can I find it? And that's what we have to fix. And that's why we have to have all hands on deck approach to this. And it's not just about building houses either, because you need the infrastructure to go along with it. You need water, sewer, and stormwater. And you need permits to build it as well. So along with the resources, we have to take a multifaceted look at how do we accomplish what we're setting out to do. And again, whether it's Act 250 or some of the measures that we're trying to implement on the local level to allow for more housing in certain designated areas. So again, it's across the board, but I would say housing is probably the most important at this point.
Governor, we've learned that only 3,000 people are on unemployment. What do we know about the people who left jobs altogether? Who are these people? How are they surviving?
Matt?
That's a great question, and that's kind of why I started off my presentation with the illustration that the U.S. Census, 2020 census, is still not yet resolved to our full satisfaction, such that it is not fully incorporated in our statistical models. With that said, throughout the pandemic, working with our federal partners, we were able to get some glimpses into our labor force. On balance, rough numbers, we're talking about a contraction in the Vermont labor force of about 26,000 Vermonters, about 7%, and that's over a short period of time, about a 2-year stretch. During the pandemic, there was some additional outreach to households to better understand their situation, and I would say on balance about half of them reported that they were opting for retirement at that period of time, which again goes to the point of, maybe that was a temporary thing in terms of this concept of unretirement. But from an economic standpoint, that's a good indication that many people, they're towards the end of their working life, as they've had a long, successful career, and now are looking to transition to other opportunities. So it's possible that about half of them are in retirement and may or may not come back.
So picture 50 to 65-year-old people, what are we talking?
Yeah, I think that's a safe conclusion in terms of the demographics. They would profile older than average, as Vermont does for the U.S. overall. And I think one thing that I just would highlight from an economic standpoint, what makes this economic downturn so much different than the one that we experienced in 2007, ultimately bottoming out in 2009, 2010, is asset prices. Asset prices have remained very high throughout, whether we're talking about housing or we're talking about the stock market. And so if you were considering retirement in 2007, 8, 9, you're like, well, this might not be a good time for me to retire. However, if you're in an economic downturn as we are currently, and you say, you know what, this might be a time for me to take a step back, reassess my situation, and maybe return to the labor force.
Again, can I just one thing here? I just want to show again. This is what's the most interesting to me. When you look at the 65, well, the sweet spots in terms of the workforce, 35 to 54, back in 2000, 195,000 Vermonters there. 20 years later, we're down by almost 45,000 in 20 years, down to 151,000. So where did they go? Again, I know Matt has talked about this, but 77,000 65 and older in 2000. Today is 120. That's where they went, from here to here. And we haven't replaced them. We haven't backfilled. We don't have enough people in the working age population to fulfill the needs. So it's pretty simple math in some respects. Yes?
Yeah, so I run a staffing agency, and we work predominantly in the lower skilled, unskilled labor pool. And the majority of people who come to follow up to this question, the majority of people who come to us are not on unemployment. They're that's the number that he asked the question about how many are not in the unemployment that are outside of that 3,000. There seems to be a substantial amount of people. People that are homeless, people that are coming out of incarceration, and there's the people that have been out of the workforce so long because of the fact that so their unemployment benefits are growing. So we have a handle on that.
Right here, in this labor force participation chart right here, Matt can explain it better than I can.
Yeah, there's a couple of concepts at play here. One is the eligibility or the administration of unemployment insurance benefits, which I think we're talking about, the 3,000 number. But then there's like the statistical concepts, which I've been discussing here, like the labor force, the number of unemployed, not necessarily related to people claiming unemployment insurance benefits. So, for example, my federal partners estimate the number of people who are unemployed, and receiving unemployment insurance benefits is not a criteria of being unemployed from an economic standpoint. These are people who are actively looking for work, willing and able to accept work if offered. That population is around 8,000. But that's why to this gentleman's question, I answered immediately, the labor force itself has pulled back 26,000. So those are the people outside the conversation of the number of people unemployed and the number of people receiving unemployment insurance benefits. Just to shine a point on it, or put a point on it, it is most likely there's significant overlap between the people who are receiving unemployment insurance benefits and the population that's defined as unemployed. But you have to be actively looking for work and willing to accept work to be considered unemployed from a statistical standpoint. And during this pandemic, we've seen how much of a challenge that is. Previously, it's like you could give up, right? You'd stop looking for work. There's no jobs out there for me, being the traditional rationale. Well, based on job posting data, based on the level of activity out there with employers, we would say that message is getting out there. There are jobs out there. If you are actively looking in the last month, there's a good chance that you'd be able to find one. But it's the other categories that make it a little bit different. During a global health pandemic, are you willing to accept work if offered? Are you able to accept work if offered? If you have health concerns, if you have some health concerns with someone in your household, you might have more follow-up questions. Say, I'm not sure if I'm ready to accept a job right now because I don't know what my employer can do or what kind of schedule I can have or the concerns I have about me or my loved ones. But that's what we're talking about. The labor force is what is considered to be the people that we can tap to that are ready to go, ready to participate in the growing economic concern that is the Vermont economy, and that's what we've seen a 7% pullback in just the last 2 years.
And again, when I brought up those on unemployment, it was just to make the point. I hear it anecdotally. I hear from people saying, we just need to put them back to work and we can solve the problem. And my point was that's not going to solve the problem. In fact, we're down to 2.7% unemployment at this point in time, and I think pre-pandemic we might have been at 2.2 or 3, something like that, the lowest in the country. I expect we'll get there fairly soon, and maybe even go below that. Keep in mind, 1.5 years ago to the date, I would say we had 90,000 on unemployment at that point in time. So now reducing that to 2,750 is pretty substantial in a short period of time.
Governor,
Yes.
Tim at Vermont Biz, I have a follow-up too. Continuing on that theme, how do you get these people to unretire? We all know people who have retired young. There's a lot of them out there. How do you get them to unretire? Obviously, they have skills and they're able to go, maybe still in their 50s.
Well, I think, again, they
They're
do.
gonna flow through their equity in their house. And
I
then
think,
have to-
you know, from what I've heard, and again, this is anecdotally, I was talking to the owner of a hardware store in Barrie and asked him about some of his workforce challenges. And he said, you know, what I've done is provided more flexibility. I've given this flexible schedules, and I don't need them every day, or I want to work with them. Tell me what you can do for those who have retired, who are over the age of 65. And he's been successful in bringing them back into the workforce by just giving them that flexibility, because they don't want a full-time job, some of them. They just want the flexibility to enjoy their life, but they wouldn't mind the extra income either. So it's forcing employers to do things that they haven't done before. And for some, it's been successful. For others, it's still probably a challenge, because you can't. It's hard to offer flexibility when you have a pavement crew, for instance. You need someone there, you know, every single day. But there are some sectors where flexibility is key. Any other?
I'll just say, you know, we've been pleading, and hopefully you can help us get this out there, but we have been pleading with retirees who have a skill that they, you know, could come back and help, right? It's to the governor's point, employers are willing to be a little more flexible and create a situation that would work for a retiree that doesn't want to work 40 hours of the week, but may be willing to work 15 or 20, and they can backfill. There's also a lot of great stories sort of circulating around Vermont where, you know, a general store is short employees, and so the community comes together and they get volunteers, retirees that are willing to come in and, you know, slice meat or do whatever it might be to keep the store doors open. So I think that there are a variety of ways we can get people back in it, and a lot of it is just really pleading to the sense of we need the help right now. So.
You know, I was thinking, Governor, on the earlier presentation about on the other side of that, there's less youth participation as well. Is that in part because there are fewer youth-related jobs, retail, that sort of thing? Now?
Well, I'd say it's probably multifaceted, the answer. But again, from our population numbers, we have fewer kids. I mean, we have fewer kids in our schools. We have 30,000 fewer kids in pre-K through 12 than we did 20, 30 years ago. And we look at the same with our state colleges. I mean, that's their problem, right? Lack of customers. They don't have enough in particular, Vermonters enrolling, because I'd say probably 10, 15 years ago, 90% of those enrolled in state colleges were Vermont kids, right? So if you have 20 or 30,000 fewer of them, then that has an effect on your state college system. And that's been part of the issue. They don't have enough customers to continue along the same, you know, do business the same way they've always done business. That's why they needed to take some structural changes, make some structural changes in order to be more sustainable. Anything else add to that as far as the younger population?
Thank you, Governor. There is some interesting data coming out about 16 to 19-year-olds that just recently is coming out about maybe there is starting to be a little bit of a turn in the tide, and I think there's being a more open discussion about career awareness, educational opportunities, so people are becoming better informed. But to your direct question, I don't think the jobs themselves are any different or in terms of availability. I just think it's the complexities. What I hear from parents, at least, when I do engagements at schools with parents present, is they say that there isn't time in the week because students are involved in courses that provide homework, and plus they're also playing sports or involved in theater or music, and so actually really maximizing the opportunities within the high school environment. However, there is a cost to that in the fact that they is a delayed entry into the labor force. And while many of us do not have the same job that we started out, if you were 16, 17, I certainly don't, which was, by the way, across the street at the AMP, my first job, from where we are. You learn so much about yourself, and that's really what this whole event is about. What the work we've tried to do with the department is to start the conversation early and often with young Vermonters to say, hey, there are opportunities in the state of Vermont. Let's get you exploring what those might be. Let's get you on a pathway to career exposure through the positions available to you right now. And to the earlier point about getting people to unretire, it's a lot of the same conversation. How can employers innovate? How can they be creative about the positions they're trying to fill? Maybe one position that they're having difficulty filling needs to be split into 2 part-time jobs, where some of the aspects can be handled by a younger employee and others could be handled by somebody looking for part-time work on the other spectrum of the age.
Just to follow up one more time on this, and this is why I'm so focused on the career and technical education piece, because if you might recall in the yield bill, I had said that we ought to take, there was a $90 million surplus in the education fund, and I proposed that we take half of that and rebate it to taxpayers who overpaid. The other half, I said we need to invest in career and technical education, which I think we're in desperate need of. And part of that was introducing more counselors, more guidance for youth. Because in taking the stigma out of CTE as well. I mean, some of the most successful people I know came from the trades. They came from the trades, and it's a lucrative career at this point in time, and I think you'll see that out here today. So just more focus on that, and we need to invest in that in order to be more successful in the future.
I have a question. I'm going to switch gears a little bit and ask about pensions. I know some legislative leadership basically commented they waited until the 11th hour to weigh in on the existing pension deal. Why wait? What's your response to that? Why wait until this point in the session?
Oh, it wasn't this part in the session, first of all. Okay. I think let's do the timeline here, okay? I think that's important, and let's have the facts. First of all, this was something that I proposed to the legislature, that they needed to take the lead on this. They're much closer to the unions than I am. It was them that had to solve this issue. I'm a willing partner, willing to help out in any way we could. So they formed a task force to do that. I signed the bill. I said, sure, a task force to contemplate what we do with our pension system. So that passed. They formed the task force, a task force of 13, 6 union members, 6 appointed by the legislature, 1 they directed as the Department of Financial Regulation, the commissioner, Mike Pichak. They appointed him. So that they met periodically over the summer. We heard, I mean, anecdotally, we weren't hearing directly from them. But they were in discussions. Some days it was better than others. Along about the end of the year, I heard that there wasn't any movement. That was around the 1st of January. I didn't hear about anything. All of a sudden, we hear in January through the press, through the media, that they had a deal. Well, we didn't know anything about the deal. Nobody came to us or to me and said, Governor, what do you think about the deal that we just had with the union, behind closed doors, by the way, and which I understand, which is fine, but they didn't present it to me and say, what do you think about this? Is this something we can live with? And never did see the bill until late February, and we had to get it from JFO, the legislature. It wasn't even in bill form. This task force presented the legislature with their findings. So then it had to be put into bill form. That was done March 8th. That was when it was assigned a bill number, introduced into the legislature at that time, March 8th. March 9th, we wrote them a letter addressing some of the concerns that we had with that bill back in March, the first part of March. I've been involved in the legislature for over 20 years now. March 9th, March 8th isn't too late. Isn't too late. It hadn't even gone through either body at that point. It was just introduced. So, introduced in the Senate, went over to the House, and they passed that in the last couple of weeks. So, again, there was plenty of time, plenty of opportunity to address the concerns that I have with that. And the concern I have mostly is giving workers more choice, giving them the option of whether they want to be in the defined benefit plan or the defined contribution. Not forcing anybody to do anything, but giving them the choice and having some risk sharing. So I would say, this isn't too late. It's just giving them choice.
Just to back up on the timeline, a member of your own cabinet was on.
That was appointed by the legislature.
Yes.
Not.
No.
Now, to be honest, no, there wasn't any coordination. In fact, if you read his, he hadn't seen the bill before he's asked to vote on it, or the task force's findings. He wasn't shown that. He was shown that the day of, and he voted in favor to move the process forward so the legislature could continue to work on it. And I think you'll find that in some of his remarks.
So what would be your criteria? I know you got into that a little bit just now. What would be your criteria, your red line for?
Give them choice. Give new employees, not existing employees. Give new employees a choice whether they want defined contribution, they want their own plan, so that they can determine what they want to do. It's portable. They can take it with them if they decide to stay in the. They don't have to be fully vested. Like right now, you have to work 5 years before you're fully vested. Otherwise, if you left within 5 years, you can only take what you put in, not what the state put in. This would give a defined contribution, would allow new hires only, the choice, not force them into it, and give them the ability to keep it on their own. If they decide to work 4 years, 5 years, 6 years, 10 years, 20 years, and decide to leave state government when they get there, maybe at 18 or 19, they could take it with them, and then they could use it in the future. So just giving them choice and flexibility, and we pay into it every year. We know where we stand, right? Every year. We're not going to have a liability because we've already paid it to them. It's like good cash management. It's good to give them, and then we don't have it in our as a liability.
So are you saying the deal must have a defined contribution?
From my standpoint, yes. Right. And I've been clear with legislative leadership since the first part of March.
All right, we'll move to the phones now, starting with Andrew McGregor, Caledonian Record. I don't know if they can hear me from here, so if you want.
Yes, thank you. Can you hear me okay?
We can.
Excellent. For Matthew Berowitz, note in your data that the Kingdom stands out with the shrinking population and labor force in Essex and Caledonia counties. I imagine there's a chicken and egg discussion about the causes for this, and I'm interested in your thoughts on that. But also curious about looking forward. Is there a risk of a negative feedback loop developing that might exacerbate population pressures, diminishing employment and economic activity in the Kingdom?
That's a good question. The Northeast Kingdom does, from a population standpoint, stand out for two counties, Essex and Caledonia, as you mentioned. As an economist, one thing I do believe in is the pendulum, and so I do think there is a swing to all this. So, addressing your last question first, in theory, there is the possibility of negative feedback loop. However, I think the economy itself will right the ship itself. So if you actually had a declining population sufficient in, say, Essex or Caledonia County, that there became vacancies of homes, I think people would welcome that opportunity to move in those areas, and as a result would reverse the trend as far as population is concerned.
So just a variable housing stock is gonna make the difference.
It could.
I guess then perhaps for Secretary Curley and or the governor, does the Kingdom have the community infrastructure, if you will, to take advantage of some of the programs and investments that you've been discussing over the course of the last several months.
And maybe you could, when you talk about infrastructure, are you talking about like the traditional water, sewer, stormwater, education, and so forth?
No, I mean the expertise and the organizations to tap into the funding sources and the economic development opportunities to make sure that the kingdom's represented at the table.
Yeah, we believe so. I mean, that's been an area, particularly the rural parts of the state, from my perspective since day one, is how do we revitalize the other 12 counties of the state. I think the Chittenden County is doing okay. They could be doing better. The Northwest Franklin County is doing better, but could certainly be doing even better with more of these investments. But I've been worried about the other 12 counties throughout Vermont that are outside the Northwest. And so that's been our focus, and we want to be a partner with them and give them any help we can, expertise. If they don't have it, we want to help them get through it. Secretary Curley.
We do have confidence that the Northeast Kingdom has folks that are working within the kingdom to really access opportunities that you talk about, some of this the federal dollars, the COVID relief funds, and then the American Rescue dollars. I think that the Northeast Kingdom has become really well known as well outside Vermont when you think about the incredible outdoor recreation opportunities that have been popping up over time. And folks, especially throughout the pandemic, really wanted to be outdoors more and simplify their lives. And I think that that is a very attractive area for people to consider living in. And again, the governor has been saying right along, there are 14 counties and we're taking care of all of Vermont. So we feel confident that there are leaders right within the kingdom, but also from the state's perspective, we are going to make sure that everybody has available opportunities, and where extra technical assistance may be needed, we're going to make sure it's provided. Is that helpful?
Okay, thanks everybody.
Thanks.
Bob Kinzel, VPR.
Bob Kinzel, are you there?
Star 6 to unmute.
Hopefully you can hear me.
We can.
Oh, good. Governor, you've talked about the importance just now about the defined contribution option in the future, and yet just last week your pension guru, David Coates, said that there really hasn't been any specific modeling done on this option for state employees and teachers to have a feeling of how it would work out and its real impact. So why not study this approach? What lawmakers have said is let's study this approach over the summer and fall and come back in January with some concrete research and data so that the people can know what impact this would have. Why is that such a bad idea?
Well, Bob, I mean, if you're telling me there's those on the other side who don't think this is going to be very effective and it's not going to be utilized and there's not much interest, what's the harm? Put it into place. Pretty simple. And if you believe that that's the case, then I would counter that. Prove me wrong,
But is this something? I mean, this is something that could have a big impact. It might not. What is the harm in studying it ahead of time? Why put something into place that could be harmful?
Yeah.
You're a pretty cautious guy on financial stuff. Why not take a real close look at this over the next 4 to 6 months? People know what they're talking about, and then they can come back and consider it with data and research.
Well, again, what would be, maybe you could describe what the harm would be. I mean, this is for new hires only, and they have choice. What is the harm that could come to be?
Well, I I guess my question for you is, what's the harm in studying this so everybody knows what they're getting into?
We study everything to death. And usually studies lead to inaction. Studies lead to, well, we're not going to do this. I think I've heard a number of folks on the other side say, we'll never agree to this. So it's not going to happen with a study. They're going to be in the same position they are a year from now as they are today. I guess I just don't understand why anybody would argue with giving their employees, the people that they're there to represent, choice. Vermont is all about choice. And here we want to take choice away. We have it for exempt employees right now. So they can take advantage of this now. So why not give it? We know what happened. We have it. It's not as though it's not being utilized. It's just that not everybody's able to utilize it.
And in terms of risk sharing, I mean, that could have an impact on employees in the system going forward in terms of their benefits, in terms of their contributions. Why not take a close look at that so everybody knows what's involved there?
Well, we're on a path now to unsustainability. We've known that for a number of years. I mean, this the way the system is at this point in time, and I don't believe it's going to change a whole lot. I think we're going to be in the same position we are today, 5 years from now, regardless of what we do, with the $200 million that we're going to put in. It's just from my perspective, just a giant Band-Aid without any further structural changes. So I say, why don't we try something else? Because what we're doing right now isn't going to fix the problem.
Thank you.
Ed Barber, Newport Daily Express.
Good afternoon, Governor. Can you hear me?
We can.
Okay. Actually, this is one time I actually have some questions. Okay. And I would like to know if there's been any type of studies done to determine why people are dropping out of the workforce, how they're able to survive financially without getting, the $600 a week check that was a few years ago, and then how do you incentivize people to go back to work without paying them more than people who are already working?
I think a lot of, and I'll let Commissioner Harrington or Matt talk about this. It's somewhat similar to what we answered before, but I think a lot of folks are retiring out of the system. That's where we're seeing the most. And you probably haven't been able to see our slides, but there's a vast number of people who are now over 65, about 50,000 more now than there were in 2020. And it's the same, it's been reversed in terms of the age group, the work age group from 34 to 59 or whatever it was. So that was 50,000 to the good. So they've retired out of the system. I think that's what's happened. But Mr. Harrington.
Well, let me ask this as a follow-up. Part of that was just, are people dropping out and then going on to get, what we call welfare services, as opposed to just dropping out and retiring and living off of retirement income?
This is Mike Harrington. I think to what Matt shared and what the governor just shared, there's the retirement component, which makes up the lion's share of those that left the market. I think the other thing we saw too was just a lot of movement within the labor force. So I think a lot of people used this opportunity. Maybe they were in the food service industry or frontline essential worker during the pandemic, and they used that opportunity during the pandemic to maybe gain another skill or go back to school or a certificate program, or simply just change jobs, maybe one that wasn't so forward-facing. So again, there were a lot of decisions, personal, not always professional, that people made during the pandemic based on their own living situation and personal situations that contributed to this. On top of the fact, I'm sure there were people that left the state altogether. However, I think that was a much smaller group. When you talk about people on unemployment, I mean, the maximum unemployment benefit right now is $583 per week. The definition of unemployment is partial wage replacement. So it's not meant to be a one-for-one full wage replacement for someone who's becomes unemployed through no fault of their own. During the pandemic or prior to the pandemic, the average length of time someone was on unemployment benefits was about 11 weeks, which is about half of the actual available number of weeks. And obviously individuals who are on unemployment are also looking for work at the same time. And so again, I can't tell you whether there are other social services, human services that they take advantage of throughout that process. But I think when we look at the labor force as a whole, and we look at the number of people who are unemployed or leaving unemployment,